Miss Marple had always believed that departures revealed character far more clearly than arrivals. People were rarely themselves when confronted with luggage, timetables, and the silent fear of being left behind. That winter morning in St. Mary Mead carried a particular stillness. Frost clung stubbornly to hedges and gateposts, and the village seemed to be holding its breath. Miss Marple locked the door of Bluebell Cottage, once from habit, once for reassurance, and stepped out with her modest case. She disliked excess, whether in possessions or in people. At the corner, Mrs. Price in the post office intercepted her, already full of weather and rumors. Snow was coming, she said. Trains would be delayed. Miss Marple only smiled. Snow, she replied, had a way of making people reveal themselves. The journey to Paddington passed under twitching curtains. St. Mary Mead always noticed departures. It noticed returns even more. Paddington Station unfolded like a small city, steam curling upward, voices overlapping, secrets half-spoken. Miss Marple found her reserved seat and settled by the window, handbag placed neatly on her lap, knitting atop it like a deliberate shield. Opposite her sat a well-dressed gentleman in his early 60s. Iron gray hair, confident posture, the sort of man accustomed to being obeyed. He removed his gloves but handled nothing directly. Ticket, notebook, even his handkerchief were touched with faint distaste, as though the world itself were slightly contaminated. Beside him hovered a young woman, late 20s perhaps, plainly dressed but carefully so. Her hands were clasped too tightly. Her eyes returned again and again to the gentleman's face. "You'll miss it if you don't sit down," he said sharply. She began to answer. He stopped her with a look. Miss Marple's needles paused for the briefest moment. She recognized that tone. Authority unchallenged had a way of growing careless. As the train pulled away, steam hissing like something exhaled at last, London slid backward into memory. Conversation settled into fragments. The gentleman produced a notebook and frowned at figures. The young woman watched him as though waiting for permission to breathe. When tea arrived, the gentleman wiped the rim of his cup, then wiped it again. Miss Marple noticed. The conductor received his ticket between two fingers. Afterward, the man rubbed his hand lightly against his coat sleeve. Small things, easily dismissed. Snow began falling beyond Oxford, light at first, then heavier. The train slowed, then stopped. By nightfall, the train stood stranded in open countryside, sealed by white silence. Lamps glowed softly. The world outside reflected back at the windows, enclosing the passengers together. Miss Marple did not feel afraid, but she did feel attentive. Somewhere down the carriage, someone laughed too loudly. Somewhere else, a cough went on too long. And Miss Marple, knitting steadily, thought how dangerous people became when they believed themselves entirely safe. Miss Marple awoke with a distinct certainty that something had already happened. The train lay unnaturally still. No rhythmic clatter, no gentle sway, only the faint hiss of steam and the quiet creak of cooling metal. Outside, the world had become a single unbroken sheet of white. She dressed carefully, smoothing her skirt, fastening her brooch. Voices drifted along the corridor, low, urgent. "There's a problem in Carriage B." Problems, Miss Marple knew, were rarely what people first claimed them to be. She stepped out just as a compartment door was opened. Inside lay the well-dressed gentleman from the previous day. Mr. Harold Finch, she learned, lay motionless on his narrow bed, hands folded, expression peaceful, almost composed. No sign of struggle, no disorder. A doctor, a brisk, efficient man, pronounced heart failure. Age, fatigue. The door, the attendant added, had been locked from inside. Miss Marple noticed two things at once. The lock was untouched, and the smell, faint, almost lost beneath polish and steam, but unmistakably bitter. Passengers murmured. A clergyman crossed himself. A married woman gasped softly. The young woman, Miss Elena Brooks, stood very straight, pale, her eyes fixed not on the body but on the doctor's face. "I spoke to him last night," she said quietly. "He complained of being tired." The explanation settled comfortably among them. Too comfortably. Breakfast was subdued. Conversations circled the same safe conclusions. Miss Marple listened. Mrs. Cartwright mentioned hearing movement late in the night. Her husband insisted he heard nothing at all. How fortunate, Miss Marple remarked. When the police boarded later, they were polite, apologetic, and entirely satisfied. No signs of violence. No reason to delay the train further. Miss Marple watched the snow slide past a window. Heart failure, she thought, was possible. And yet, in her long experience, natural deaths rarely left behind so many small, unsettled impressions. By afternoon, the passengers behaved less like strangers and more like villagers stranded together by circumstance. Shock loosened habits. Miss Marple sat in the lounge area, knitting resting neatly across her knees. People came and went, lingering longer than intended. The clergyman mentioned speaking to Mr. Finch around 10, perhaps later. Time behaved oddly on trains. Mrs. Cartwright was certain she heard Mr. Finch's door close firmly before sleep. She did not see him, but she was sure. Certainty, Miss Marple knew, was often borrowed. Miss Brooks finally appeared, carefully composed, exhaustion beneath the polish. She admitted bringing Mr. Finch tea the night before. He disliked the dining car, she explained. He didn't drink much of it, she added. Odd, Miss Marple thought. The cup, she recalled, had been returned unusually clean. As the train slowed again that evening, Miss Marple paused outside the sealed compartment. The air still carried that faint bitterness. Too neat, too respectful. In villages, death usually left a sorter behind. This one had been arranged. An inspector boarded at Grayford Junction. He listened more than he spoke. Passengers repeated their careful truths. Times blurred. Sounds shifted. Tea was offered. Always tea. Miss Marple spoke to him quietly afterward. Politeness, she suggested, was sometimes concealment. That evening, rumors bloomed. A will, money, disagreements remembered too clearly. Miss Marple noticed the doctor's tea had gone untouched. In villages, lies were rarely loud. They were courteous, perfectly timed. By the third day, the train felt domestic, slippers beneath coats, familiar irritations. Miss Marple arranged tea with Miss Brooks in a small side compartment. They spoke of routine, of care that felt like control, of habits that carried things along quietly. Miss Brooks watched the teacup as it filled. Later, Miss Marple asked the inspector the right question, not who entered the compartment, but who ensured Mr. Finch remained calm. The answer settled among them like a held breath. At Northmoor Station, ordinary life waited patiently. The inspector spoke plainly. Mr. Finch had been poisoned. Slowly, carefully, dissolved in tea. Routine masked bitterness. Trust ensured calm. No struggle was needed. Miss Brooks confessed quietly. Control mistaken for care. Relief mistaken for peace. The teacup had been washed too clean. Miss Marple felt no triumph, only sadness. Murder, she reflected, was rarely dramatic. It was carried out softly, politely, with care not to cause a scene. And those were the hardest kinds to see.